Hello, and welcome to the Ground and Grow podcast. I'm your host, Kayla Estinson Williams. So, for my life update this week, this was my first week back to my regular routine. So, I was off for a couple weeks over the holidays and New Year. We didn't really have our regular childcare and all that stuff. So, I did a little work during that period of time, but I was pretty much off for that full 2 weeks, which was really nice. But also felt really nice to get back into the routine this week, back with our regular childcare, and back into the groove of things. It's always so refreshing and lovely to take off more of an extended period of time. But I noticed at like the week and a half mark, I was like, okay, I feel ready to get back into it. Just having that routine and like my word of this year, consistency. It is just nice to be like, okay, I'm getting up at a regular time, going into the office, doing my thing. So that has felt really nice, feeling kind of some fresh energy to bring into my practice. So yeah, lovely things with that. It's kind of my biggest, not much has happened other than just getting back in the groove. We've been trying to get back on track with bedtimes for my toddler. So she is 2.5. She's pretty much not napping anymore, just kind of here and there sporadically. But when our routine is regular, she's pretty much not napping, which is working well for her because when she does nap, she goes to bed super late, later than me, and that's tough. So we, in this like last week of our break, we're like, okay, let's get back in routines and start actually bringing in bedtime a little bit earlier. So I've kind of been like just resigned to like, okay, she's gonna go to bed late and we're just gonna like chill in the evenings and kind of all go to bed at the same time, which has worked and kind of has been what we've needed to do with things all over the place with will she nap, will she not nap? But now I'm like, okay, let's bring her structure. Let's start the whole like bedtime routine a little bit earlier, be consistent with it. And for the last few nights in a row, she has gone to bed before 8 o'clock, which feels great because then if I want, I have a little time to just chill, watch a show, read my book, hang out with my husband, whatever. It feels nice to have just an hour to myself at the end of the evening, when I'm not so tired that I'm also passing out at 8 o'clock. So that's nice. But yeah, I think it all falls in line with that consistency, which has felt nice. I know I've just been doing it for this first week, but I'm feeling energized with it and I'm feeling motivated. But let's jump into our story share. And this comes from Reddit. Am I the asshole? So I was looking through, there's like a lot of big ones I was trying to decide on, but I thought this one was good with some psycho ed that I'd like to add to it. So the title is, Am I the Asshole for Telling My Brother-in-Law to Take Care of His Own Kids? I think that title makes it kind of obvious that like, yeah, take care of your own kids. But here we go. My sister-in-law, 36, is out of town for a week on a girls' trip to NYC. Her husband, 37, is staying home during her trip and caring for their 2 kids. Boy is 4 and the girl is 10. Both decently behaved kids, nothing crazy. Anyway, sister-in-law has been out of town for about 5 days, and this man called his wife's parents, my husband's parents, and was saying how hard it is waking up so early and how he's struggling, and he wants to ask my husband for help, but he's too embarrassed. Basically, my husband's parents have called us to say that we should call him and see if he wants any help. When I tell you I was speechless, in all caps there. I told my husband, we are not calling this man because he's their damn dad. Obviously, his wife's been doing everything and deserved that trip. I told my husband that his brother-in-law is pathetic and needs to grow up and maybe handle his own kids. If it was more than a week, maybe we would step in and help, but why? Now hubby thinks I'm being too harsh and that we should have called. What do you think, Reddit? So yeah, I think this like just displays this very common dynamic in male-female partnerships where the mom in the family is, I mean, clearly, right? Like she must have been doing so much more of the work, right? Like if waking up in the morning is like the hard thing. Like these early mornings are tough. It's like, okay, so mom was probably doing the early morning wake ups, doing all of this extra work, and now dad's realizing how much work that is. So on one hand, like kudos to mom for taking that trip and being like, all right, you can figure it out. But yeah, I can imagine for this writer being really frustrated of like, these are your kids, right? Like, um, we're not gonna maybe step in and do that work for you. I think it might be different if like this dad who's solo parenting for the week was like, oh hey, like let's set up a play date together. Like, I just want to like be around adults a little bit too, or, something like that. Or if it was like, oh, I have this like meeting I have to go to and I might need some extra help. Like, are you available at this time? Like that might be something if he was initiating that and if it made sense, right? If there was like an additional reason. It also might be different if there were some like different needs of these kiddos, right? If they were both super young, or if there were some like special needs or different things going on there, that might be like, oh yeah, it's kind of hard to do on your own, and it's okay to like ask for it and need that help. And with that, I'd say set that up in advance, right? So the piece that lets me know that it's probably not just super challenging, but it's more so, I mean, yes, it's challenging to like be the solo parent for a week. I'm not saying that that's like easy peasy or anything, but that it's like, yeah, it's going to be a tough week. Your wife's out for the week. You're solo dad for the week. Here you go. But that it's not just like super challenging is that he's not really realizing he's needing this help till now, which tells me he doesn't really know how hard it is to do all of these parenthood responsibilities. Obviously, I don't know the full story. I don't know everything behind the scenes, but that's kind of what it says to me, right? It's like you didn't anticipate that this was going to be as challenging as it is because you probably don't do these things as frequently. And so, yeah, I can see where this writer is like, feeling kind of frustrated with brother-in-law of like, you can do it, right? It's okay. But I think like the piece that is the most frustrating with this is that it's like being funneled through. It sounds like it was, I want to double check, but it sounds like it was the husband's wife's parents. Like he like communicated to them that he was struggling and like wanting help from this writer's husband, but too embarrassed to ask. It's like, this is just so like, what's happening, right? And it feels kind of like the parents here, like the parents of the husband here, and then the dad who's solo parent, or the wife who's on vacation, who's married to the dad solo parenting. Like those parents are kind of enabling it a little bit of like them calling writer's husband and being like, can you ask if he needs help? It's like, ooh, like it's so complicated, right? Like even as I'm trying to describe like who is who and what's going on, it's like, this is so messy. This is so unnecessary. Like, let's just have that direct line of communication, right? Again, if this dad who's solo parenting for the week had reached out to this guy asking for some help or support himself, that might be very different. And it would especially be different if it was planned ahead, right? Of like, hey, like I need a little me time. Like, do you mind watching the kids for a couple hours while I go to the gym or something for myself, right? Like that, I think is totally understandable, right? Like sometimes it does really take that community. We need that support. That's okay. But just the way that it's all going about, right? There's no direct communication. It sounds like it was a surprise, like how much work this ended up being. It sounds like the main complaint that was communicated is like getting up early is tough. It's like, yeah, this is just maybe showing us some imbalance in that marriage by that wife. Like it probably needed that vacation away. And she's like, I'm out. Like I need a week off because I'm probably like doing way more than my fair share of the responsibilities at home. And so, yeah, I would say this person is not the asshole for expecting her brother-in-law to care for the kids on his own. And especially like not the asshole for being like, I'm not going to reach out to see if they need the help and, all of that. Again, it might be different if there were some like extenuating circumstances, but it sounds like it's just kind of normal. Like, I don't like getting up early with the kids and it's a lot and there's a lot on my plate, right? Um, and so, like, maybe they could have communicated it more kindly to their husband, right? Of like, it sounds like she, was calling this dad pathetic and all of those things. Like, maybe she communicated differently. Okay. But I can also see if I was in that situation being kind of like, what? Like, this is not my responsibility to initiate that, right? And jump in and pick up this stuff right now. Again, totally different if the dad was asking directly for that help, right? I think that might feel like, oh, he's actually like taking a little responsibility there, right? Instead of like funneling it through other people to coordinate, right? Which makes me think that this wife on vacation probably does a lot of that coordinating all the time. And so my psycho ed today is kind of around like holding boundaries when there are other people in a family system that are kind of enabling some problem and wanting us to be a little more responsible for fixing other people's stuff. That's like a thing that shows up a lot in my clients' lived experiences, right? Often it's like maybe in their upbringing, maybe they were like the helper or their perfectionist or the one that was like babysitting more or taking care of their younger siblings or whatever it is. The kiddo in the family system that maybe had this family role that they got put into of they're going to take on more of the load, right? And so a lot of my clients fit into that category. That's kind of like a specialty of mine of like working through this attachment trauma where people maybe feel like their worth or like they're going to be good enough is associated with how much they're helping or how much responsibility for others they're taking on. A lot of like these caretaker roles. That's something I really love working with, and it shows up a lot in my work. And a lot of times we're working on boundaries of like, how can we say no to those things, which can feel really tough, right? So for example, let's say there's a family system. Let's just kind of go with like the stereotypical, right? So let's say that this person is the oldest sibling. Maybe they've got, two younger siblings that they've had to babysit a lot and had to help out a lot and did help with homework and, kind of were parentified as a child, like jumped into this parent position. Because that's maybe what parents asked them to do or expected them to do or really reinforced them doing, right? So now this person, they're grown up now, but they're still part of the family system, is like, okay, my role in the family is to be that helper, right? To be looking out for what other people need and to meet those needs. And I feel like I'm a good enough person when I'm doing that. I feel worthy because of that. And commonly for folks in that role, it's like, oh, and then I really dismiss my own needs. Maybe I never even learned how to identify my needs. It's going to be really hard for me to ask for help because that's not something I've been able to do. And I also have a really hard time saying no. And so that's kind of a two-part process. Like working on these boundaries and changing these roles can be really hard in adulthood because even when you're grown up and everyone lives outside of the family system, sometimes in these family systems, like parents might come to that person and be like, oh, like your little sibling is having a hard time with this. Like, can you reach out to them, see how they're doing? All of these things. Or, oh, like, so-and-so needs this. Like, I know you're so good at it. Can you jump in and help? Often it's not really coming from a bad intention, but it's coming from this lack of awareness of like, it's a lot of responsibility to put on someone, right? And I'm not saying we can't like be caring and loving towards our family and like reach out and help out and support them. I think that's all great. But figuring out, am I doing this because it feels authentic and it feels like I have the space to do that? And I know that it can also be reciprocated towards me when I need that. Or is it this role that I just keep doing in my family system because I feel like I have to and I don't have a choice? And often that is where a lot of my clients end up feeling, right? Of like, this is just what I'm supposed to do. And to break out of that would cause stress on my family system because this has been a role that they've needed someone to fill. And so in that moment, if their parent is saying like, oh, your younger sibling is struggling in college, can you like reach out to them, see how they're doing, and all of this, right? Like they're putting this responsibility on them. And then it's also kind of enabling, right? So if that's been a common pattern, maybe younger sibling isn't used to identifying when they need help and asking for it themselves. Maybe they get used to, oh, other people are going to see that need and meet it right away. Right. And again, it's not from this place of intention. It's just this role that they've kind of been put into of, okay, like people are going to take care of me. Right. Um, and so we can see how these roles keep you stuck. Right. If oldest sibling is always looking at here's what your needs are and I'm going to meet them, and youngest siblings like, oh, I never have to identify my needs because you're just going to come and meet them. And there's probably a lot more complicated stuff that happens with that. It enables both, right? And both stay stuck in this, and neither kind of like get to connect to the skills that actually honor what they need, right? And on both ends, it might be identifying when I need support and advocating for myself and asking for that. As well as looking at what can I do to create space for myself, right? What can I do to connect to skills that I need that are going to help me get through it? So, all of that to say, these roles and being stuck in them are not helpful for us. So we want to challenge them and we want to break free of them, but it's really hard to do because if a parent asks you to ask your younger sibling if they need help, if you say no, that might be an uncomfortable conversation. And I think the tough reality is that we have to accept like breaking out of these roles is going to feel uncomfortable. If my family is really used to me jumping into this role all the time, saying yes and just doing it, they're not used to hearing no, and they might not get why. And in this moment, yes, we can practice our skills to try to like communicate that boundary, let them know why, all of those things. Know that in the end, your goal isn't necessarily going to be that they all understand and support it. That would be great. And we can like have that as a piece that we would like. And really the goal is you stepping outside of that role. It's probably going to have a positive effect on your whole family system in the long run. In the short run, it might be stressful, but in the long run, there's a positive effect, right? Because you are no longer contributing to this cycle happening in the way that it's happening. So in the long run, there will probably be a very positive effect. In the short run, it might feel confusing. It might feel stressful. It might result in you getting lectured or badgered or asked for more things or whatever. Like in the short run, it can be tough depending on like how complicated those roles and dynamics are in your family system. But our goal is for us to step outside of the role. And so first identify like what your goal is, what you need to do there. And then you might bring in a dear man. So if you're not familiar with that communication skill, it's like a few episodes back, you'll hear a dear man episode where I talk through what a dear man is and how we can do it. And it's like a script of how we can communicate a boundary that we need, right? And so here I would recommend using a dear man to communicate like, hey, I hear that you are worried about my younger sibling. I understand that. And, I'm not wanting to take on that responsibility as much. And you might communicate like what your comfort level is of like, here's what I'm comfortable supporting them in. And here's what I'm not comfortable supporting them in, right? Like I'm not going to continue asking them if they need support before they ask for it from me. Or I'm not going to jump in certain great lengths to like solve their problems for them, right? So whatever it is, but really you're communicating to the parent in this situation, like, don't continue asking me to do that. And if you do continue to ask me to do that, I'm not like, just know I'm not going to say yes to these things. And they might have a hard time with it and it might be uncomfortable. We can try to get them to understand. They may or may not, right? Depending on their own stuff, but that's their own stuff. We can feel good about communicating it skillfully, whether or not they understood it. But it is so helpful for us, and like figuring out how to hold space for us to start advocating for that. So that's one big part of work that's really hard. And then the other part of the work is really looking in of like, how do I really let myself know that I'm still good enough? I'm still a worthy human. All of these things are true, even when I'm not doing that role. Because I think a lot of times that's the hardest part is like, okay, I know I don't want to do that work anymore, but like, who am I without this role? Right? Like, that is how I felt good enough in so many different moments of my life. And so I think sometimes that's where the juicy part of the work is like, how do I feel good enough in myself? And how do I maybe discover who I am and what I need and what these boundaries are, in order to start holding them? And I think that's like the moment, if you're stuck on that piece and you're like, oh my gosh, like I can see this and I can see that I don't want to be in this role anymore, but like that feels so painful. And I like don't even know how to explore that within myself. Like, I know, very therapist-y thing for me to say, but I think that's where therapy can be a really great fit, right? So that's like work that I do so often with my clients is exploring like what that role feels like and how it's impacted them, but also like creating some space for them to discover who they are, what their values are, what ways they want to take up space, how they can practice it and challenge those feelings of guilt that are probably going to show up when they take up space and they say no. Like, those things are so tough. It's like the feeling stuff underneath is really challenging with that. So if you're listening to this and you're someone who lives in Minnesota and you're like, ooh, that's a work that I need to do, I do have a couple openings. So you can head to my website. It'll be linked in my bio if you want to learn more about what that work could be like or are looking for a therapist to do that work with. You have to be in Minnesota just because of all the licensure laws. But it's really good work. It's really hard work and it's really life-changing work. So if you were listening to this Am I the Asshole and you're like, oh my gosh, that feels like a dynamic that happens in my family system in one way or another, here is a loving invitation to like look inwards and kind of look at like, how can I not be a part of that equation in the same way? It's not an easy question to answer. It's not an easy thing to work in. But you might just find that you feel a whole lot better about who you are and how you relate with others when you can step outside of these roles. It's long-term work. It's not something you're going to snap your fingers and do in a month. But it's really meaningful work. So that's my little plug. If that's resonating with you, I invite you to work in it. Work on it with a trusted, licensed professional, if that's your jam, if that's your vibe. So that's what I have for you today. If you liked this episode or any of the other episodes, please leave a rate or review wherever you're listening. I would so greatly appreciate it. It's super meaningful to me. Share it with people that you think would enjoy it. That would be wonderful too. Otherwise, I hope you are having a nice week, and I will look forward to talking to you all next week.